Hard work is not simply a physical or mental task, it's tied to brain chemistry. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation and reward, is not only released when you achieve success, but also when you learn to attach reward to the process itself. By shifting your mindset from craving the outcome to embracing the effort, you train your brain to anticipate satisfaction during hard work rather than just at the finish line. Effort often feels uncomfortable because the body and brain register it as stress. But stress is not inherently negative. It's a signal that adaptation is happening. By reframing that friction as the fuel for growth, you can literally condition your nervous system to interpret hard work as progress. Over time, this reframing transforms effort from something you avoid into something you seek. What you pay attention to determines whether effort feels depleting or energizing. By deliberately focusing on the small improvements you make in the midst of hard work, you create a reinforcing loop of motivation. Attention acts as the steering wheel of your brain, directing dopamine release toward the process and teaching you to love the act of working hard. The brain is plastic, meaning it can be rewired through repetition. If you consistently reward yourself, not with external treats, but with internal recognition, every time you engage in effort, you build a powerful association: effort equals reward. Over weeks and months, this rewiring makes the pursuit of hard work almost automatic, turning it into something you crave instead of resist. To train your brain effectively, you need daily practices. These include intentionally doing something effortful and consciously telling yourself that the effort itself is the win, practicing short bouts of intense focus, and celebrating small victories along the way. These practices amplify dopamine during effort, condition your nervous system to seek challenge, and build resilience that compounds across every area of life. When we talk about training the brain to love hard work, the foundation begins with understanding the neurochemistry that drives motivation and reward. At the core of this process is dopamine, often misunderstood as simply the pleasure molecule. Dopamine is not about pleasure alone. It is about anticipation, motivation, and the drive to pursue what lies ahead. The way dopamine operates is crucial because it shapes how we perceive effort and how we decide whether or not to lean into hard work. Most people assume that dopamine only comes at the end of a process after a reward has been achieved, but science shows us that this is not the whole story. In fact, dopamine can be released during effort itself if we train our minds to interpret the strain, the friction, and the challenge as rewarding. This is not a trick of positive thinking. It is a neurochemical reality that we can condition over time. Consider the standard way most of us are taught to think about goals. We set an outcome, a promotion, a degree, a physical transformation, a project completed. We then work through the grind with the belief that the reward will come at the end. The problem with this approach is that the brain quickly begins to register effort as something costly, something that drains resources, and it holds off on delivering dopamine until the finish line. That creates a fragile system because if the reward is delayed or smaller than expected, motivation plummets. Worse still, if the reward doesn't come at all, the brain associates effort with disappointment, which weakens the drive for future challenges. This is why so many people struggle to stay consistent. They are wired to chase only the end point rather than the process. What changes everything is the realization that dopamine is not fixed to outcomes. Dopamine can be experienced in the middle of effort if the brain learns to attach significance and meaning to the very act of working hard. When you consciously tell yourself that the struggle is the reward, that the effort is what makes you stronger, you are teaching your nervous system to release dopamine not when you are finished, but while you are in motion. This is a form of self-directed conditioning where you reframe what hard work represents. Instead of effort being a tax you pay on the way to success, effort itself becomes the signal of success. Neuroscience has shown that the brain is remarkably plastic, meaning it changes in response to experience. Every time you lean into hard work and choose to attach positive meaning to the grind, you are strengthening circuits that link effort to reward. Think of it as a feedback loop. Effort leads to dopamine, dopamine reinforces effort, and the cycle continues. Over time, this rewiring shifts your entire relationship with hard work. Rather than avoiding the discomfort of effort, you begin to seek it out because your brain has learned that effort itself feels good. This is not a motivational slogan. It is a biological truth that you can leverage to your advantage. To understand this better, Imagine two different athletes training for the same event. One views practice as a necessary evil, tolerating the pain in exchange for the thrill of victory later. The other tells themselves repeatedly that the sweat, the burn, the strain are the victory, that each repetition is the prize. The first athlete is dependent on the competition outcome for dopamine, while the second is bathing their brain in dopamine throughout the training process. Over weeks and months, who do you think will sustain their drive? It is the second athlete, because their neurochemistry is aligned with the process, not chained to the unpredictable outcome. This same principle applies to academics, entrepreneurship, art, or any domain of effort. There's also a deeper layer to dopamine's role in effort, the concept of reinforcement learning. The brain is designed to repeat behaviors that led to dopamine release in the past. If every time you push yourself, you only feel drained, the brain registers effort as something to avoid. If every time you push yourself, you consciously attach reward to the act itself, the brain records effort as something valuable. In both cases, the wiring becomes stronger with repetition, and soon it operates automatically without you needing to think about it. This is why people who genuinely love hard work seem different. They have conditioned their neurochemistry to reinforce effort itself. It is worth noting that this is not about ignoring outcomes or abandoning goals. Outcomes still matter, but they should be viewed as milestones, not as the sole source of reward. When you learn to appreciate the neurochemical gift of effort, outcomes become secondary amplifiers rather than the entire game. This shift protects you from burnout because your drive is no longer held hostage by external results. You become resilient in the face of setbacks because even when outcomes do not match expectations, your brain still rewards the process. This is the key to sustaining motivation for years, not just days or weeks. The beauty of this neurochemical framework is that it applies universally. Whether you are studying for an exam, building a business, training your body, or developing a skill, the same mechanism can be applied. By linking dopamine to effort, you are essentially teaching your brain to crave challenge, to view obstacles as opportunities, and to love the friction of the climb. And the more you practice this mental reframing, the more automatic it becomes. Eventually, effort stops feeling like something you force yourself into and starts feeling like something you cannot live without. This is how the brain learns to love hard work, through the very chemistry that drives motivation. At its core, hard work inevitably brings with it a sense of stress, a pressure that weighs on the body and the mind. For many people, that stress is interpreted as something negative, something to avoid or reduce at all costs. Yet the truth is that stress is not inherently bad. In fact, it is the very mechanism through which growth and adaptation occur. The key lies not in eliminating stress, but in reframing it so that the brain and body begin to perceive it as a signal of progress rather than a threat. When this reframing happens, hard work stops being a punishment and becomes an opportunity, because every ounce of stress encountered during effort is understood as evidence that the system is changing, strengthening, and expanding its capacity. At a biological level, stress is simply the body's response to increased demand. The nervous system releases adrenaline, the heart rate elevates, breathing quickens, and cortisol is mobilized to provide the energy needed to push through challenge. If we label these sensations as negative, the brain forms an association that effort equals suffering. That association makes us pull back, procrastinate, or avoid situations where hard work is required. But if we recognize those same signals as the body gearing up for growth, the perception changes entirely. The pounding heart is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that the system is engaging. The tension in the muscles is not an indication of danger. It is an indicator that the body is adapting to a higher level of demand. The same stress response that makes some people quit can make others stronger depending on the frame applied to it. This is where the concept of stress inoculation comes into play. Just as vaccines train the immune system by introducing a controlled amount of a challenge, exposing ourselves repeatedly to manageable levels of effort trains the brain and body to handle stress more effectively. Each time we lean into hard work and decide to embrace the discomfort, we are conditioning the nervous system to interpret stress differently. Over time, this shifts the baseline. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel normal. What once triggered avoidance becomes a familiar signal of progress. The stress response itself doesn't disappear, but the meaning we attach to it changes, and with that, our ability to sustain effort expands dramatically. The psychological component is equally critical. Stress often brings thoughts of self-doubt, frustration, or the desire to escape. If unchecked, these thoughts form a narrative that hard work is something to endure only when necessary. But by consciously reshaping the story, we can direct the brain to register stress as a friend rather than an enemy. Telling yourself, this is what growth feels like, or this pressure is the proof that I'm getting better, is not empty affirmation. It is a way of teaching the brain to reinterpret signals that would otherwise be coded as threat. This shift in interpretation releases dopamine during the process, reinforcing the very effort that once felt unbearable. Think of elite performers, whether in sports, science, or creative fields. They all encounter tremendous stress in their pursuits. The difference is not that they are free from it, but that they have conditioned themselves to see stress as evidence of progress. The burning in the lungs during a run is reframed as increased capacity for endurance. The frustration during problem solving is reframed as the brain stretching to build new neural pathways. The repetition of failure is reframed as the necessary ingredient for eventual success. By adopting this mindset, they transform the universal stress of effort into a personal signal of advancement. Another crucial aspect of reframing stress into growth is understanding the role of recovery. Stress by itself does not produce growth unless it is paired with rest and adaptation. Muscles grow stronger after they are stressed and then allowed to recover. The brain consolidates learning after periods of intense focus followed by sleep. Resilience is built through cycles of challenge and recovery, not through constant, unrelenting strain. Recognizing this cycle helps remove the fear of stress. You can allow yourself to experience discomfort fully, knowing that it is part of a larger arc of adaptation. Instead of seeing stress as the enemy, you begin to view it as the catalyst for transformation. The power of reframing also lies in its compounding effect. Each time you encounter stress and choose to interpret it as growth, you are reinforcing a neural circuit that strengthens over time. The brain thrives on repetition, and the more often you pair effort with positive meaning, the more automatic it becomes. Eventually, stress no longer triggers the same aversive reactions. It becomes a familiar companion, a signal that you are on the right path. This is why some people appear to thrive under pressure while others collapse. It is not genetic destiny, it is trained perception. From a practical standpoint, this reframing can be applied daily. During a workout, when your muscles ache, instead of thinking, this is painful, you can think, this is how strength is built. While studying for hours, when fatigue sets in, you can think, this is the process of wiring new circuits in my brain. When facing rejection or failure in your work, instead of internalizing defeat, you can think, this is the stress that forces me to adapt and innovate. These micro shifts in interpretation accumulate, and before long, the way you relate to stress changes at a fundamental level. What makes this even more profound is the realization that stress is unavoidable in life. You cannot escape it, no matter how carefully you plan, but you can decide how to meet it. You can either allow stress to be the barrier that keeps you from hard work, or you can harness it as the signal that hard work is transforming you. Once the brain learns that stress equals growth, it begins to crave the very experiences that once felt overwhelming. This craving is not masochism. It is the recognition that within stress lies the seed of every meaningful adaptation effort. By itself is not what determines whether you come to love hard work. The decisive factor is where your attention goes while you are working. Attention is like the steering wheel of the brain. It determines which experiences become wired into your neural circuits and which fade away. When you place your attention on how difficult something feels, your brain encodes effort as exhausting and depleting. But when you direct your focus toward the small gains you are making, the micro progress in the moment, your brain learns to attach reward to the process of working hard. This is not about tricking yourself or ignoring reality. It is about understanding how attention shapes the release of dopamine and other neurochemicals, and then deliberately guiding it in a way that fuels motivation rather than drains it. Most people approach effort with attention anchored in one of two places, the outcome or the obstacle. When attention is locked on the outcome, the brain delays reward until the goal is reached. Every step in between feels like a cost, a drain on energy that must be endured until the finish line. If the outcome is far away, this can make effort feel unbearable, like running toward a horizon that never seems closer. On the other hand, when attention is fixed on the obstacle, the difficulty, the fatigue, the challenge, the brain amplifies the stress response, flooding you with signals that this is unpleasant and should be avoided. Neither of these modes of attention cultivates a love of hard work because both frame the process as something negative. The secret lies in a third mode of attention, focusing on the incremental improvements made during the effort itself. When you bring your awareness to the micro, progress you achieve in real time, something powerful happens in the brain. Each time you notice that you are getting slightly stronger, solving a problem a little faster, or staying focused a few minutes longer, you are giving your brain evidence that effort is paying off in the moment. That evidence triggers dopamine release, not later, but right then, and dopamine reinforces the behavior. The act of noticing progress transforms hard work from a drain into a source of energy. This is why attention is so critical. It acts as the bridge between effort and reward. Consider the example of someone learning a new skill, such as playing a musical instrument. If their attention is only on playing the song perfectly, every practice session feels like a failure until the song is mastered. Motivation declines, frustration builds, and practice becomes a chore. But if their attention shifts to the fact that today their fingers moved a little faster, or they made fewer mistakes in a single section, then every session feels rewarding. Those small wins accumulate, dopamine is released along the way, and practice becomes something they look forward to rather than avoid. The difference is not in the difficulty of the task, but in the placement of attention. The brain's capacity for plasticity, the ability to rewire itself, depends heavily on where attention is directed. Neural circuits that are activated repeatedly get stronger. If you continually focus on how hard something feels, those circuits become more robust, and effort becomes linked to fatigue in your neural wiring. If you continually focus on progress during effort, the circuits linking hard work to reward strengthen instead. Attention literally dictates how your brain encodes the meaning of effort, and with repetition, this becomes automatic. This explains why some people genuinely seem to thrive in high-effort environments while others crumble. They have trained their attention to highlight progress rather than pain. Another important aspect of attention is its role in narrowing perception. The human brain has a limited capacity for processing information at any given time. When you scatter your attention across distractions, thinking about the outcome, worrying about mistakes, or comparing yourself to others, the effort feels heavier because the brain is overwhelmed. But when you direct focus tightly onto the task at hand, effort feels lighter, even though the work is objectively the same. This is because deep focus engages the prefrontal cortex, the brain's control center, which quiets down other competing signals of stress or fatigue. In this state, sometimes called flow, the work itself becomes immersive, and the brain rewards it with a heightened sense of satisfaction. Attention is the entry point to this state, and cultivating it makes hard work not just tolerable, but enjoyable. Deliberate focus is also about the story you tell yourself in the moment of effort. When your attention is on complaints or resistance, the work drags. When your attention is on curiosity, asking, what can I improve right now? The brain shifts from resistance to engagement. This subtle redirection of attention is often the difference between quitting and persisting, between dreading effort and learning to crave it. Over time, each redirection reinforces the association that hard work brings growth, and attention itself becomes trained to seek out progress. Even the way you notice fatigue can be reframed through attention. Instead of focusing on the discomfort of being tired, you can focus on the fact that you are still able to continue despite the fatigue. That shift tells the brain that endurance itself is a form of progress, and dopamine follows. Attention turns what looks like a limitation into a marker of advancement. The body feels the same, but the meaning attached to it changes entirely because of where focus is directed. Practical application of this principle is simple but powerful. In any effortful task, deliberately pause to notice the micro progress being made. Tell yourself explicitly what has improved, even if it is small. This act of focused attention is what signals to the brain that effort is rewarding. Over weeks and months, it reshapes how the brain automatically responds to effort. Instead of associating work with depletion, the brain learns to associate it with progress and reward. This makes motivation self-sustaining because each session of effort reinforces itself through attention-driven dopamine release. The role of attention and focus in loving hard work cannot be overstated. Attention determines what becomes encoded in the brain, what becomes linked to dopamine, and ultimately whether effort feels draining or energizing. By taking control of where attention goes, you are not just changing your thoughts, you are changing the wiring of your brain. This is the mechanism that allows you to turn hard work into something you look forward to, not because the work itself is easier, but because the way your brain experiences it has been fundamentally reshaped through the deliberate act of directing focus toward progress. One of the most powerful features of the human brain is its plasticity, the ability to change in response to experience. This adaptability means that the way we relate to hard work is not fixed. We can train the brain to associate effort with reward, creating a loop where the very act of pushing ourselves becomes satisfying. This process is not automatic. It requires conscious repetition, but once established, it rewires the nervous system in a way that transforms effort from something to be resisted into something to be sought out. Understanding this association between effort and reward is the key to sustaining long-term motivation, consistency, and resilience. The effort-reward association is built through dopamine, the neurochemical that drives motivation and reinforcement. Dopamine is released when the brain detects that something valuable is happening, and this release tells the nervous system, do this again. What makes this so important is that dopamine is not limited to external rewards like money, recognition, or success. It can also be tied to the internal process of working hard. If you consistently recognize and reward the act of effort itself, the brain will begin to release dopamine during the process, not just after it. Over time, this conditions the brain to crave effort because it predicts reward every time you engage in it. Consider how this association is built in everyday life. If a child is only praised when they get an A on a test, their brain learns that effort is only valuable when it produces a perfect result. But if the child is also praised for the time they spent studying, for pushing through difficult problems, or for simply showing persistence, their brain begins to link the act of effort with reward. As adults, the same principle applies. If you only allow yourself to feel satisfaction when you achieve the outcome, motivation becomes fragile and inconsistent. But if you decide to celebrate the act of working hard, regardless of immediate results, you are building a strong, durable circuit in the brain that links effort directly to reward. This effort-reward association is what separates those who burn out from those who sustain high performance over years. When effort is tied only to outcomes, disappointment and setbacks can destroy motivation. The absence of a reward after hard work feels like a betrayal, and the brain learns to avoid future effort. But when effort itself is rewarding, setbacks do not carry the same weight because the brain is still receiving dopamine from the process. Even in failure, motivation continues because the nervous system has been conditioned to value the act of trying. This is why people who genuinely love hard work are resilient. Their effort is not dependent on external validation. It is sustained by the internal reward system they have built. The process of building this association begins with conscious recognition. Each time you engage in hard work, you must deliberately mark it as a victory. This can be as simple as telling yourself, this is the reward. This effort is the win. At first, it might feel artificial because the brain is still wired to expect outcomes as the source of reward. But repetition is what strengthens neural circuits. Over time, the brain begins to automatically release dopamine during effort because it has learned from past experience that effort always leads to reward. What begins as a deliberate practice eventually becomes second nature. There is also a physiological reason why this works. The brain's reward system is designed to be highly flexible, and it responds not just to external events, but also to internal interpretation. When you consciously decide that effort is rewarding, you are engaging the prefrontal cortex to reinterpret the meaning of effort. That reinterpretation changes the activity of dopamine pathways, shifting reward from outcome-based to process-based. With repetition, the brain learns to anticipate dopamine during effort, and the association becomes embedded at a deeper, more automatic level. This is how plasticity works. Repeated experiences paired with consistent meaning reshape the wiring of the nervous system. Real-world examples make this clear. Think of a writer working on a novel. If they only allow themselves to feel satisfaction when the book is finished, every day of writing feels like a chore. But if they reward themselves for the act of sitting down to write, for producing even a single page, their brain starts to release dopamine during the writing process. They begin to crave the daily effort, not just the finished book. The same is true for an athlete in training. If their satisfaction only comes from winning competitions, the grueling daily practice feels like suffering. But if they train their mind to see every workout, every drop of sweat as the reward, their brain begins to reinforce the act of training itself. This is the difference between temporary motivation and sustainable drive. Another important dimension is the scalability of the effort-reward association. Once built in one domain, it can extend into others. If you have trained your brain to see physical exercise as rewarding, you are more likely to find satisfaction in working hard on a project or pushing through a challenging problem, because the same neural circuits are being engaged. The association between effort and reward becomes a general trait, not limited to one specific area. This creates a powerful compounding effect, where the more you reinforce effort in any one domain, the more your brain learns to crave effort in all domains. It is also critical to understand that this association must be self-generated. External rewards like money, praise, or recognition can be powerful motivators, but they are unreliable and limited. If you depend on them alone, your motivation is fragile. When external rewards are absent, the drive disappears. But when you build the effort-reward association internally, it becomes independent of external circumstances. The brain releases dopamine because of how you interpret effort, not because of what the world gives you. This makes motivation far more stable, resilient, and sustainable over time. Building the effort-reward association is ultimately about taking control of the brain's reward system. Instead of waiting for outcomes to deliver satisfaction, you teach your brain that the act of trying, the act of pushing, the act of doing hard work is itself the source of reward. Through repetition, this association becomes automatic, rewiring the nervous system so that effort no longer feels like something to avoid, but like something to pursue. The more you reinforce it, the stronger it becomes until hard work itself is experienced as a form of reward. Independent of the outcome, training the brain to love hard work is not something that happens in theory, it happens in practice. The nervous system changes through repetition, and what you do daily is what wires your circuits for the long term. This means that building a genuine love for effort requires deliberate routines and consistent behaviors that teach the brain over and over again that effort equals reward. The challenge is that most people know they want to love hard work, but they do not know how to structure their days in a way that conditions their brain to build this association. The answer lies in simple, repeatable practices that transform effort from something you occasionally push through into something you consistently crave. One of the most effective daily practices is intentionally choosing one effortful activity and consciously linking it to reward. This does not mean bribing yourself with external treats, but rather telling yourself in real time that the effort itself is the victory. For example, if you commit to a workout, the moment you begin to feel resistance or fatigue is the exact moment to reframe the experience. Saying to yourself, "This is the point where I'm winning," conditions your nervous system to release dopamine during effort, not only after completion. Over time, the brain begins to anticipate that reward whenever effort arises, making you more willing to lean into it. Another critical practice is to structure short bouts of intense focus throughout the day. The brain responds well to concentrated effort followed by recovery. If you devote even 60 to 90 minutes to deep work, whether it's studying, creating, or problem solving, you are teaching your mind to associate focused effort with progress. The key here is not the duration, but the intensity of focus. By shutting out distractions and channeling attention into a single task, you amplify the dopamine that comes from noticing small improvements. When the session ends, you give yourself recovery, which further signals to the brain that effort is manageable and rewarding rather than overwhelming. These cycles of effort and recovery build resilience and strengthen the effort-reward loop. Celebrating small victories is another daily practice that reinforces the love of hard work. Too often, people wait for major milestones before acknowledging progress, but the brain thrives on frequent reinforcement. Each time you recognize improvement, no matter how small, You are giving the nervous system evidence that effort pays off. This recognition does not need to be elaborate. It can be as simple as writing down what you accomplished, pausing to reflect on the progress, or expressing gratitude for the ability to push yourself. These micro rewards are what sustain motivation during the long stretches between big achievements. They ensure that dopamine is released steadily throughout the journey rather than in one big burst at the end. Deliberately leaning into discomfort is another essential daily habit. The nervous system adapts most when it encounters friction, when the task feels slightly harder than what you are used to. If you make it a practice to do something each day that feels effortful, whether it's a difficult workout, tackling a challenging task at work, or practicing a skill that frustrates you, you are conditioning your brain to see discomfort as a signal of growth. Over time, this daily exposure rewires your perception. Discomfort shifts from being a reason to stop into a reason to continue because the brain has learned that this is where the greatest rewards are found. Equally important is the way you talk to yourself during effort. The internal dialogue you maintain while working hard shapes how your brain interprets the experience. If you constantly tell yourself how tired, frustrated, or bored you are, the brain associates effort with negativity. But if you tell yourself, this is what progress feels like, or this challenge is making me better, the brain encodes the same experience as rewarding. Making this a daily habit ensures that effort is consistently linked with positive meaning. Over time, the words you use to frame your effort become automatic triggers for motivation. Another practice is to deliberately reflect at the end of the day on the moments when you engaged in hard work. Writing down or mentally reviewing those moments reinforces the association between effort and reward. The brain consolidates learning and memory during rest, and by consciously marking effort as meaningful, you strengthen those neural connections. This makes it more likely that the next time you encounter effort, your brain will recall that past experience as rewarding, priming you to embrace it again. Integrating physical practices is also valuable because the body and brain are deeply connected. Activities like exercise, cold exposure, or even deliberate breathwork train the nervous system to stay calm and focused under stress. By practicing these daily, you are teaching your brain to tolerate discomfort and to see effort as manageable. This resilience then transfers into other areas of life. When you face a mental or emotional challenge, your brain recalls that you have successfully managed stress before, and it releases dopamine to encourage you to continue. It is important to understand that these daily practices compound over time. The brain does not change overnight, but with consistent repetition, the circuits linking effort to reward grow stronger. Each day that you intentionally reframe effort, lean into discomfort, celebrate small wins, and focus deeply, you are reinforcing the association. The repetition builds automaticity, meaning the brain begins to crave effort without you having to consciously remind yourself. What once felt like discipline becomes desire because the brain has been rewired to view effort as its own source of satisfaction. This daily conditioning also creates resilience in the face of setbacks. When outcomes do not go as planned, the brain still releases dopamine because it has learned to value effort. Failure does not break motivation because the process itself has already been rewarding. This makes it far easier to stay consistent over years, which is what ultimately determines long-term success. The people who appear unstoppable in their pursuits are not immune to fatigue or failure. They have simply built daily practices that condition their brains to keep going regardless of outcomes. The transformation from resisting hard work to loving it is not the result of one grand decision, but the accumulation of these small, deliberate practices repeated day after day. Each practice reinforces the effort-reward loop. Each repetition strengthens the neural circuits. And eventually the act of working hard becomes inseparable from the feeling of reward. Training the brain to love hard work is not about forcing yourself into endless grind or pretending that effort is always easy. It is about understanding the science of how motivation, stress attention, and reward systems operate, and then using that knowledge to reshape the way your brain interprets effort. By learning how dopamine can be released during the process, you shift from being dependent on outcomes to being fueled by the journey itself. By reframing stress as growth, you transform discomfort into a signal of progress rather than a threat. By directing your attention toward micro improvements, You amplify the rewarding aspects of effort and make progress visible in real time. By building the effort-reward association, you rewire your nervous system so that effort itself becomes intrinsically satisfying. And by engaging in daily practices, leaning into discomfort, focusing deeply, celebrating small wins, and consciously marking effort as victory, you condition your brain to seek challenge and to thrive in it. What begins as deliberate mental training eventually becomes a natural state where the brain no longer hesitates in the face of difficulty but welcomes it as the pathway to growth. Loving hard work is not a trait you are born with. It is a skill you build through repetition, attention, and reframing. When you master this process, you unlock a form of motivation that does not burn out because it is not tied to fleeting rewards but to the enduring satisfaction of effort itself. This is the foundation for resilience, consistency, and the ability to pursue goals with energy that renews itself over time.